August 1948, and a young preacher named George Vandeman was preparing to take the pulpit. That was 70 years ago, and since that time, Soquel Camp Meeting has convened every summer. In many ways, Soquel embodies America's camp meeting, a timeless tradition of faith intersecting with culture, pleasure with praise, and truth within tradition. Camp meeting is so valuable we believe it should be shared not just once, but all year long. That is why the Central California Conference leadership team has produced the best of Soquel. Our special made-for-TV editions showcase the best Soquel has to offer, while providing for you the best of Soquel programming from the comfort of your own home. These newly released programs are our gifts to you, and the best part is you don't have to register an RV, pack a suitcase, sleep in a tent, or so much as leave your front door. You can literally go to camp meeting right now from the comfort of that favorite armchair. We invite you today to sit back, relax, let the Holy Spirit in, and enjoy the best of Soquel today.
Today, the Hmong people are still being persecuted in Laos because they're still related to the Vietnam War, and they still not able to find peace in their lives. So I was kind of fortunate that I get to experience kind of like a Thailand life, a refugee life, and then here in America. So I became a converted Christian. My cousin keep asking me, my cousin Wayne, to church and to the youth activities that they have at the time. And before that, I was just doing my own thing. I want to get away from the church. I didn't want to just go to church because my parents told me so. So I just went my own ways, and one day we went to Soquel Camp Meeting, and Pastor Jose Rojas was preaching. So he was preaching about faith and hope and love. Throughout that whole sermon, I think I was in tears the whole time. So after that, I decided to look back in my life, right? What happened to me? And that's when it kind of kicked me that my life was so bad because I didn't have God in my life. And so I just wanted. So since then, I've been trying to change my life around, and one of the ways that can keep my faith going is to be active for God. So this ministry that we are doing right now is we're trying to get out there and reach out to the Hmong people and try and let them know about God. He can save and make life easier for the Hmong people. Before we can get this kind of message out to the Hmong people, we every week we would have to do a record, and we don't have much, but we have a camera, right? And we have a pastor that's gonna teach the message. So Wang and I have been helping pastor just at least shoot his message and then edit the message. As of right now, conference is helping us with the money that we got from last year. We were able to pay the TV station to give us once a week on a Tuesday night from an hour from 7 to 8, and they would show that message on Hmong TV. Just I feel blessed to be involved in this ministry, even though it's not something that's big right now, but it's a start for us. Hmong TV it's barely came out the last couple of years too, so it hasn't been that long since Hmong TV came on. But we're thankful that we were able to do this, and we're getting calls, or pastors getting calls from people, saying that they never heard of this kind of message before. Even though they've been a Christian for a long time, and because they're not Seventh-day Adventists, they haven't heard this kind of message that God's gonna come soon, and how the world it's coming to what the Bible is predicting, and everything is heading towards God's second coming. So we just want to get that out to the people so they can be prepared for it.
When I woke up this morning, it was a little overcast. It was cool. I just love it. Came onto campus and I'm seeing people walk around with hoodies and blankets and so on. And I said to one young man, "Are you cold?" And he goes, "Oh, yeah, I'm cold." And I thought, boy, this is my kind of weather. I'm a cool weather girl. I was being interviewed one time on stage, and the host was probably not terribly seasoned. In our conversation, he says to me, "How old are you?" And I said, "That, young man, is none of your business. Next question." He blanks. He says, "Well, can you at least tell me where you were born?" I said, "Yes, I remember that. I was born in Calgary, only about 6 blocks from the Stampede grounds, no less." And I said, "Actually, it was 56 degrees below zero Fahrenheit when I came out the chute." And he goes, "Calgary?" I said, "Yes, that's a city in the province of Alberta in Canada." He's still looking a little puzzled. I said, "Up north, thousands of miles up north?" And he goes, "Oh." And we went on to something else. I don't think they teach geography like they used to. What can I say? But my brain just comes alive in the fall in Northern California. I don't like it as cold as it was when I was born by any stretch of the imagination, but I like cool. I was doing this presentation for a group of high school students. Their brains aren't done. As long as you realize that, you can have lots of fun with them. But this prefrontal cortex right behind your forehead's not done till probably mid to late 20s. And unfortunately, by then, many people have made lots of serious, life-impactful decisions, some of which don't work so well when their brain finally gets done. But I love the questions they ask. And one student stood up and said, "I don't know what neurobiology means." I said, "Good question. Do you know any ology words?" And the student says, "I know psychology. I'm going to study psychology." I said, "Good. Psych means the mind, and ology means the study of the mind. And most commonly, it includes behaviors that people exhibit that come out of their thinking." So I said, "Now look at neurobiology. Ology means the study of, bio means life, and neuro means the nerves, the nervous system, the brain, the central nervous system, which involves the spinal cord, and all the peripheral nerves, the software, if you will, that you can change just by a thought." So neurobiology is the study of the nervous system in living creatures, the anatomy, the physiology, the functions, the outcome, the problems that exist with it, and so on and so forth. And that's the topic for today, the neurobiology of fear. Good news, there is an antidote. I'm kind of glad that the topic yesterday, stress, came first. Because fear triggers the stress response. And now that you know a little bit about what the stress response is, we can concentrate on the neurobiology of fear and what you can do about it. Quick review. Emotions, what are they? They are measurable physical responses, physiological throughout the body, caused by your internal environment, what you're thinking, and the external environment, whatever's going on outside of you. I talk about 4 core emotions. Each one is different. We now believe there is a specific neuropeptide, a specific brain chemical that influences mood associated with each one. So you can't simultaneously experience 2 emotions. They can alternate back and forth quickly, but not 2 at the same time. That's helpful to know. So what are feelings? Feelings are the interpretations that your brain creates based on its recognition of the emotion, what it means, how important it is, how much weight you're giving to it. And feelings typically, fairly quickly, follow emotions because the brain always wants to make sense of things. So it's trying to make sense of the emotion and what caused it to arise and what does it mean, and out of that it creates feelings. I mentioned yesterday that emotions and feelings follow separate pathways in the brain, because some people have a difficult time understanding that although they may be kissing cousins, they are different entities. They even follow different pathways in the brain. Unfortunately, in the English language, which is the one I'm most familiar with, I did take 4 years of French and 2 years of Latin in high school because my mother was a language teacher. I remember complaining about Latin. I said, "Mom, this is a dead language. What am I doing this for?" But sometimes now I really have fun drawing on that knowledge because Latin underpins many words in the English language, as I'm sure you already know. Unfortunately, because many people use emotions and feelings, the words synonymously, it creates confusion about them. I think I mentioned earlier in this series that when I work with Montessori teachers, because they teach this stuff to preschool kids. Imagine if we'd known this in preschool. And so we try to use different words. The emotion of anger, and I feel mad. The emotion of fear, and I'm scared. The emotion of sadness, and I feel bad sad. And that's to try to help the children understand their different words. Growing up, what did you learn about fear? What were you taught about fear? Because often what you were taught and what you learned are 2 different things. We learn by watching the adults in our family. What was role modeled to you about fear? If you were a male, was it sissy stuff if you were scared of anything? I remember one little kid, and I don't know what had scared him, but he wet his pants. And somebody said to him, "Oh, honey, are you scared?" "No, I'm not scared." He was just so scared he wet his pants, because that's an automatic physiological response many times to fear. So what was your home atmosphere? When you really think back, was it confident? Was it hopeful? Was it positively expectant? Or was it fearful? Were you so worried about what other people might think you couldn't even concentrate on your own behaviors? I asked that question once, and a woman said, "Well, between you and me, our atmosphere was sad, but I can't tell anybody that because it would be disrespectful to my parents." And I said, "Get a life." I'm pretty sure that most sets of parents do the best they can with what they know at the time. It is not disrespectful to acknowledge some of these factors, because if you can't label and describe them, you can't deal with them, you can't change them. And I believe the brain works best in an atmosphere of joy and hope, and you can create that. Did you learn that all core emotions are positive? Or were you taught that joy is the only one that's positive? All emotions are positive, every single one of them. Joy, anger, fear, and sadness. Because they help you manage specific types of situations and events in life. And if you can't use them all, then there's going to be types of situations that you're going to manage abysmally, if at all. I think the reason people talk about negative emotions is they don't understand that emotions and the behaviors that are exhibited are two different things. And many behaviors are negative around emotions, but that doesn't make the emotion negative. The reason I only talk about 4 core emotions, and fear is one of them, is because these are the emotions that researchers have been able to detect on the face of the developing fetus during pregnancy based on what's happening to the mother. And this is what I call the emotions staircase. You can see that joy is highlighted because that's the default position in the brain. Some researchers believe the human brain is actually hardwired for joy unless something interferes with that. It's the one you want to maintain unless one of the other protective emotions needs to get your attention. Because joy is the only emotion that has no negative consequences when maintained over time. All the other 3 protective emotions, if you hang on to them, have negative consequences. So you see that as you go down the staircase, there's joy, the default position, then you come to anger, it's closest to joy, then fear, and then sadness. And down on the floor level of that staircase, you can see apathy. Apathy is not an emotion. Apathy is the result of mismanagement of emotions. It's an overwhelm, and the brain just can't seem to do anything. You'll notice at the very top, there is a step above joy. It's called euphoria. Euphoria is a piece of joy, but it is very intense, momentary joy. The brain was never designed to live at euphoria. It's too intense. Somebody says to me, so when do you think you're going to be really euphoric? I said, well, for one thing, when I turn 122 and I've got this birthday cake and there are 122 lit candles on it, trust me, I'll be euphoric. But it's not going to last forever. And people who don't understand that, or who have little joy in their life, usually get involved with an addictive process to try to trigger the brain reward systems to straight line euphoria. And that's false joy, deleterious to both brain and body, and hardcore addicts don't live all that long. PET scan studies, positron emission tomography, have revealed wonderful things about the brain and brain function. So, for example, here's a drawing that shows you the left hemisphere of the brain and the right hemisphere of the brain with some of the tissue peeled back. So you can see that the right hemisphere is just filled with neuron pathways. It's more white in color, which is why I talk about your brain, gray glove on your left hand, white glove on your right hand, because it's those axons in the right hemisphere are wrapped with myelin, think fiber optics, which actually increases the speed at which information crosses the neuron pathways. So the 3 protective emotions, anger, fear, and sadness, when you do a PET scan, are more aligned with the right hemisphere, whereas joy and genuine euphoria are more aligned with the left hemisphere. Somebody asked me, well, why is that? And I have to explain that the brain cannot answer the question why. It can give you some information, but can't answer the question why. And if you don't know that, you're always asking people why. Teenagers whose brains aren't done yet. Why did you do that? I don't know. Well, that's no answer. Tell me why you did that. Ridiculous. You have just stressed their brain and increased the emotion of fear. If you want to ask a question, get rid of the word why. Let's say that one of your kids picked up a group of friends. They stopped and got a 6-pack of beer. The driver actually drank one. They get pulled over. Cops see open containers in the car. Of course, the cop didn't come until they'd run into a sign and knocked it over. So the kid gets, taken to jail, and the parents go to bail him out. And the first question is, why did you do that? Why did you hit the sign? He's going, I don't know. Then the kid gets in trouble for that answer. Ask. When you picked up your friends and somebody brought a 6-pack of beer in the car, did you think about whether or not somebody might open a can, which is illegal? No. Well, maybe next time you will. If that happens, did you think about pulling over and stopping and calling one of us on the cell phone and avoiding drinking any yourself? No, didn't think of that. Well, brain's not done. But you can get the information without asking why. So the emotion of fear. It's between anger and sadness. And you can be angrily fearful and sadly fearful. I don't know that you're ever joyfully fearful. But the emotion of fear is just a signal, just like one of these highway cones or highway flags that wants to get your attention and alert you that you might be in some kind of danger here. The problem with fear is it can be real, actual danger, or it can be imagined danger. And either way, both of them are going to trigger the stress response. It really involves a personal perception that somehow you're not safe. And that can be life-saving if it's bona fide danger and we pay attention to it. For years, I worked with youth authority and with young women who had been date raped. And we would ask them, how is it you happened to go on this particular date? And they'd have some, answer. Oh, because he was cute. Oh, because he asked me. Oh, because I wanted to go to the dance, whatever. And they end up being date raped. And we say, were there no clues that you picked up that maybe this wasn't a good choice? And sometimes they'll come up with something and then they'll say, yeah, but I thought that was silly. Intuition is built into the brain. Pay attention to it. And then you go talk to the young men who were accused of date rape, and you ask them, talk to me about what happened. And it's really sad, because some of them will say, well, we were getting amorous, and I wanted a little more. And so I started pushing. And I said, and so what did your date do? Well, she started giggling. And then she said, don't want to do that. And I said, and he said, well, I just thought she wanted me to think she was a good girl, and if I pushed a little more, I'd get what I wanted. We have to teach our young people, number one, pay attention to intuition. But if you're in a situation where it's not working for you, you need to do two things. I don't want to do that. Is not one of them. You do emotion. Any brain on the planet will get it. This is stop. And then you say, stop. And believe me, got a cell phone and they're not stopping, that's when you call 911. But we don't pay attention to fear and we get trapped sometimes. It's automatically induced. You do not choose fear unless you have read a really scary book or watched a really scary movie or in a 50,000 person crowd where there's starting to be some violence. The brain automatically registers fear as soon as it perceives a threat, real or imagined. It will immediately trigger the stress response cascade, which we talked about yesterday. First, it will pour out corticotropin releasing factor in that middle mammalian layer. Then that information goes down to the locus coeruleus in the brainstem. Norepinephrine is the messenger that transmits it everywhere in the brain and the nervous system. And then you get cortisol being released, and you get adrenaline being released, and so on. It takes 72 hours to recover from one episode of fear. So if it's imagined fear, and you're watching scary movies every night till 3 o'clock in the morning, then you're responsible for triggering the fear response. Having said that, the ability to recognize fear, to identify it accurately, to get the information it's trying to communicate with you, to you, to know whether it's real or imaginary, can literally be life-saving. And if you can't do that, you can't take good care of yourself. If you can't do that, you can't help protect people you love. So it's critically important to do that. And the bottom line, as I just said, without the emotion of fear, without recognizing it and getting the information, you're a sitting duck, if you want to use that term. So what are people afraid of? When you do large sample studies in this country, the big fears are natural disasters like 9/11. Terrorism, because the news just loves to report terrorism. I asked an announcer once, what is it? There's not one piece of good news on the broadcast this morning. And he looked at me and he shook his head and he goes, good news doesn't sell. I said, what does that say about this culture? He says, good news doesn't sell. You put on a wonderful story about somebody that saved another person out of the river or whatever, and people go, oh yeah, okay. And they'll turn to another station that's talking about bad news. It's mind-blowing. Airline travel, that's a big fear for some, and those of us who get on airplanes regularly really need to get a handle on fear. Public speaking, it in airline travel used to be number 1 and 2. You know that in this country. It's been a little bit displaced with natural disasters and terrorism. Aging, boy, I'm so glad I'm still alive and able to age. I've got younger family members who kicked the bucket long ago and have no opportunity to age. It's just fine with me. And I have a pretty high goal I'm heading for. Financial crisis, what am I going to do about eating? You know what? You can eat much more simply than you think you can. Be better for your brain, too. Fear of disease, fear of dementia. That's what brain function is all about. Helping you learn to prevent, minimize, handle disease and dementia. That's probably bona fide fear at some level. But most human beings have more fear about imaginary fears than real fears.
Greetings and welcome to the Best of Soquel. My name is Ramiro Cano, President of the Central California Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. The pin of inspiration shares the following. The Camp Meeting is one of the most important agencies in our work. It is one of the most effective methods of arresting the attention of the people. Volume 6 of Testimonies, page 31. The Central California Conference has had a very long tradition with our annual camp meeting ministry. We can trace it back for over 138 years in our conference territory. For the last 70 years, camp meeting has been held in our conference center in Soquel, California, near Santa Cruz. Camp meeting continues to be a transformative blessing, embodying old-fashioned tent revival evangelism while simultaneously sharing God's Word through a variety of inspirational and riveting speakers. Last year alone, the Soquel Camp Meeting pulpit was host to over 71 hours of live television broadcasting for both local and streaming to a worldwide church community of more than 96 countries, transporting the hope of God's soon return and the comfort of Christ's love to the furthest places of the world. It is my honor and my privilege to make the best of Soquel available to you. At the same time, I invite you to become part of the Soquel legacy by partnering with us in our evangelism fund. Each year, Soquel Camp Meeting goers collect funds to propel evangelism in a variety of ways. To do so, go to Central California Conference's homepage, centralcaliforniaadventist.com. Even $1 a day is of great value to God's work. These gifts are 100% for evangelism. We invite you to also download our app, CCC Space SDA. Through it, you can enjoy many video sermons. We also have a prayer wall where you can submit a prayer request. So, dear friends, wherever you are today, I invite you to sit back, let the Holy Spirit lead, be transformed by the message, the prayers, and the testimony segments. Catch and enjoy the best of Soquel.
And I encourage you to take a look at your imaginary fears. You know, what are yours? Some common ones are, I'm not good enough, never get it right. Or, I'm not smart enough, I'm not very bright, so I don't think I can go to college and make something out of my life. I'm not handsome enough. By whose standards? Every brain on the planet is different, so is every face and every body. And that's a journey for some, was certainly for me, because I was born into a family with a mother that the whole family thought was startlingly attractive. Jet black hair, big blue eyes, peaches and cream complexion, you know, very Irish. I look like my father. He wasn't a dog, as somebody once said. But he probably was not as handsome for a man as she was beautiful for a woman. And for a lot of years, I compared myself to my mother, and I didn't look like her, so that meant I was ugly. Take a look at those and get rid of them, because they'll be triggering the stress response for you. Don't fit in? Okay, what do you want to fit into? Every brain's different. You know how to play the game well enough in a group to not egregiously stick out. But what is fitting in? It just means being like the rest of the brains in the room, and it's never going to happen. So stop trying. I'm unlovable. Everybody's lovable. I've never found a person yet that some dog was willing to die for that person. I mean, come on. If animals can love people, we can love people. And it starts with loving yourself. You're no better than anybody else, but you're here. I mean, somebody was talking about death, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. And they were grieving that this person isn't here anymore. And it's so sad, and I don't know if I want to go on living. And I said, hold it. That's one way to think. I choose to rejoice that it happened at all, that I even had the opportunity to get to know this person for X number of years. What are you telling yourself? You're afraid you aren't going to be successful? Well, success is partly a choice. It involves getting to know about brain function, and yours in particular, and then following the steps for success. Do you feel rejected? Not everybody's going to like you. You don't like everybody. You know, I tell people, I have not a huge family, but quite a few family members. I love all of them. I don't like all of them. I don't. I love them, but I don't like to spend much time around them because they're very negative. There's something wrong with everything. So, you know, everybody doesn't like you. Fine, every brain is different. If you care about people, you're perfectly willing to have them like you or not like you. And boy, if you're speaking in public, you better get that one down. Because somebody is not going to like the way you look, or the way you move, or the way you talk, or what you say. Fine, it's their brain's opinion. You do not have to pick it up. And you never have to argue. You never have to respond to an invitation to argue just because somebody invited you. So imagine fear, as I mentioned, triggers the same stress response as real fear. In fact, imagine fear may even be worse because you're probably carrying that fear right up in your prefrontal cortex in working memory, which means it's constantly there in the background. And that can be pretty deleterious. So I asked my artist, I love to do this. I'll call him up and I'll say, Seth, can you do me a cartoon about fear? And he'll go, sure. Sometimes I can't show it. And I have to go back and say, let's tweak this a little bit. So here's his cartoon on fear. And he says, well, here's the kid. And he's going, what do you mean there's nothing to fear? He wants to go on a date and he's scared she won't accept him. He's dreaming about goblins or other whatevers under the bed. He's terrified of having to give a speech in English class. And there's nothing to fear. Are you nuts? So what do you fear? Remember, you can only manage what you can identify and describe. So be honest about it. If you do not manage fear well, here's the problem. It will downshift your brain. It will kill ideas. It will stifle creativity. Have you heard about people talking about writer's block? They're afraid of something. They're stressed. And all of that gets dampened down in the brain. It can undermine confidence. It can escalate into phobias. You're afraid of something once, and then you globalize it to everything else that might remotely resemble that. We talked about apathy and immobility. If you can't manage it, there you are, a little puddle on the floor, not doing much. It will lock down the frontal cortex, the prefrontal cortex right behind your forehead. What does that mean? It means you want most of your energy and attention up here in that prefrontal cortex that has the human executive functions, planning, willpower, all of that kind of stuff. And in the grip of fear, the brain begins to redirect its energy and attention away from that third level where you have some conscious thought down into the second level or clear down into the reptilian level. And not only does that trigger the stress response, but it can exacerbate the stress, contribute to illness, disease, you name it. What are the typical symptoms when you're afraid? You know that. We're not going to spend much time on that. People get nervous. Sometimes they're gasping for air. Sometimes they're holding their breath, often trembling. Sometimes they're really irritable. Do you know somebody who's really irritable and you can't figure out any reason they're so irritable? Well, they might be afraid of something, but not able to verbalize it. Sweating changes. Sweating patterns, often you perspire with fear. Restlessness. You feel trapped, hopeless. You can't see how you're going to get out of this. Changes in heart rate. You know, it's all part of the stress response. You can't relax, can't go to sleep. Go to sleep but wake up and can't get back to sleep. Can't concentrate. So little kids that go to school and they're very fearful because their home situation is so dysfunctional, they can't learn. They can't concentrate. Paranoia, everybody's out to get me. I doubt it. I'm not important enough for everybody to be out to get me. And certainly increased self-consciousness. We know that there are, again, some male-female differences with this. Males are socialized to discount risk. And therefore, it's not masculine to admit that you're fearful. So what we often see in males when they're frightened is anger. They exhibit fear as anger. It's right next to fear on the emotional staircase. We see males who are trying to exert excessive control. They're really very fearful. We see that in the phenomenon of wives who are battered by their husbands. Their husbands are fearful. Somebody else might like their wife. She might leave them, whatever. And so they start trying to exhibit this excessive control, which is totally an illusion. Obsessive compulsive disorder, yeah, we're afraid you didn't turn the iron off and maybe it's going to burn the house down. And it escalates from there. You see individuals in positions of leadership who become very dictatorial. And usually that brain is consumed with fear. In females, we're socialized to be dependent. Maybe not as much now as we were in the late 1800s when I was a girl. But we were socialized to depend on some male. They were going to take care of us. And that's the reason in many family systems, women didn't go to college. They were just told to marry some man who'd gone to college. And he'd take care of them. It's not quite that bad now, but we're still socialized to want somebody else to help us with fear. And females may actually show fear, but they often show it as sadness. Can you see the difference? On the staircase, there's anger, fear, and sadness. Males who are fearful often go to anger. Females who are fearful often go to sadness. And so you can't always recognize that fear is the underlying emotion. Anxiety, which is part of fear. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the United States. 40 million adults over the age of 18. 18% of the population. This country spends 1/3 of the $148 billion spent annually on mental illness. Imagine what we could do with that in terms of the highway if people got their act together. In the United States, and it's very similar in Australia because I was there recently, the most common forms of anxiety in order of prevalence, how often they're seen, is something called generalized anxiety disorder. They don't even really know why they're anxious. They're just anxious. Then they get anxious about being anxious. Obsessive compulsive disorder. Panic disorder. And when you have a panic disorder, you can be pretty sure that the brain is living in that mammalian layer because that's where phobias originate, panic attacks, and PTSD. Fear of the unknown is what researchers believe underlie most anxiety disorders, whatever kind it is you're talking about. You don't know what's going to happen. No, you don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be a surprise. And sometimes it's a wonderful surprise, and sometimes it's not such a wonderful surprise, but it keeps life interesting, depending on how you want to deal with it. Your perception of fear, your beliefs about fear, your responses, they are typically learned in childhood, and if you don't have one that's working for you, you can change it. Joseph Chilton Pearce, I love this researcher. Any fear or anger shifts the energy and attention from the neocortex right down to the reptilian brain. And when you're in the grip of a strong emotion, except for joy, your brain is in a biochemically altered state. Emotional processes are lightning fast. We have to get that. Thoughts cross some neuron highways at the rate of 600 miles per hour, and emotional processes are faster than that. And because they're so fast, they can hijack your brain's reasoning process, and you can do things you wish you had not done later. Negative outcomes can't learn. A lot of cognitive functions are involved because they're in the prefrontal cortex. Can't problem solve, don't do cause and effect reasoning well, don't do rational or logical thinking, have trouble with planning, have trouble with making judgments, certainly have trouble with choosing. It accelerates the aging process, no place I want to go. We talked about phobias. You can reactivate old habits that you thought you had altered despite available information, which is the strength of addictive behaviors. And you can suppress immune system function, which increases your risk for disease. I sometimes showed the addictive programs this particular figure. It's boxes, 4 by 4. And I'd ask them, how many boxes are there? And what would you say? 16? One big one, 17? Go home and check it out. Because if you are upshifted, I don't know how many there are, because certainly there's 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, bigger ones, 25, on the way up. You lose abstract thinking when your brain is derailed by fear. So what's the antidote? It is gratitude. Fear downshifts the brain from the prefrontal cortex down to the mammalian and reptilian layers. Gratitude upshifts it. It's such an easy strategy. The moment you're in the grip of fear, think of something for which to be grateful. It's so simple. One lady said to me, I don't have anything for which to be grateful. I said, well, I can think of one. What? I said, the fact that you're able to even tell yourself that you don't have anything for which to be grateful. It's a skill. The last thing at night and the first thing in the morning, I always am grateful for something. I mentioned this yesterday. Remember, you can only experience one emotion at a time. And it will run back and forth from the wings depending on what's happening in your life. You want joy on the stage with you all the time, unless something's going on where anger, fear, or sadness needs to give you some information. Then joy will go off, and one at a time, whichever is appropriate, will come on. And you basically decide how long they're going to stay on the stage with you and when joy is coming back on. So here's the bottom line. Men like bottom lines. I actually hear some of them brave enough to say, don't tell me the whole story. Just go tell that to your girlfriends. Just give me the bottom line. And women do not understand that because they need to tell the whole story from A to Z. No, you don't. Not to a man. Give him the bottom line. Trust me. If he wants more information, he'll actually ask a question. So, bottom line, fear and gratitude, which is part of the emotion of joy, cannot coexist in the brain simultaneously. It's one or the other. So John Henry Jowett said, gratitude is a vaccine, an antioxidant, and an antiseptic. What a nice medical way to put that. Remember, the brain thinks in pictures. And a positive picture is one step. What you say is what you get. A negative is 2 steps, and the brain may not reconfigure that negative. Every family is dysfunctional, but in a mildly dysfunctional family, most children hear 9 to 10 negatives for every positive, and an outright negative dysfunctional family, they hear 30, 40, 50 negatives for every positive. Self-talk can be really, really helpful when dealing with fear. And the new formula is this. You talk to your brain as if it was a separate entity. Yeah, it's all in your skull. But talk to it with your given name and the pronoun you. The formula is short, positive, present tense words that create the picture you want. So if I'm getting ready to do a presentation, I will say, Arlene, you are remembering what you need to talk about. You're having fun doing it. You are glad of the opportunity. And your brain goes, oh, really? Okay, fine, let's go for it. And statistically, if we had time, I could give you study after study. Never, Arlene, you're going to. Never, Arlene, you wish. It's Arlene, you are, as if it's happening right now, and I'm not even on stage yet. But my brain only gets in gear when it thinks it's happening now. And that's because your brain can only do what it thinks it can do. And you're the one who tells it what it can do. And you do that through your self-talk. So if you want to be successful and get a handle on fear especially, you need to tell your brain only what you want to do and stop talking about what you don't want to do or don't want to have happen. One of my favorite examples is an adult will say to a child, don't touch the stove. What picture does that create in the brain first? Touching the stove, because the brain always thinks in pictures. Yes, there was a don't there, but that's even hard for brains that are supposedly mature to convert. Very difficult for a child. I did this once again with a group of students, and I said, don't think about the ugly red monkey. And one of the students says, that's all I'm thinking about. I said, uh-huh. And somebody else says, well, you idiot, don't think about the ugly red monkey. Think about the pretty brown monkey. And another student says, well, who says she even wants us to think about a monkey? I said, good. A negative tells you what the person doesn't want you to do. It does not tell you what to do. So only tell yourself and others what you want to have done and stop talking about what you don't want to have done. So fear is an extremely valuable assistant. It's one of the 4 core emotions. I really think of the core emotions as my 4 personal, invaluable assistants. I've got them with me all the time. I just have to recognize them and use them. I believe I told you yesterday that research suggests metaphorically we each have a stage in our brain. And I have a very expensive stage in my brain, thank you very much. Because when I do it in my brain, it doesn't cost me a penny. So I've got Carrara marble from Italy, half circle, 3 steps, whole row of Corinthian pillars. They're my favorite pillar styles in solid gold. Thank you, no gold plating for me. 2 wings, and I'm on stage every moment of my life. And at any given moment, I will have one of those personal assistants on stage with me. The other 3 will be waiting in the wings in case something happens in the environment that they think they need to give me some information about so I can take appropriate action. It's marvelous. It's wonderful. But we just don't know how to use it. Working with Montessori children has been just fascinating to me. One teacher made sets of 4 cards on a lavalier, and each child has 4 cards on the peg in their schoolroom. And so when the child comes to school, the teacher says, go put the card around your neck so we'll know who's out on the stage with you, who's your assistant. And sometimes they put joy around, and sometimes they put sadness. And one little boy said, I'm sad because my mom ran over the cat this morning backing out of out of the driveway to come to school, and so I'm sad. And the teacher says, it's very appropriate. And then they talked about how long did he want to be sad. And another kid said, I'm mad because my mom was going to send me chocolate chip cookies, and my brother ate them all. And the teacher said, well, how long do you want to be mad? That's a loss, and that's appropriate. You know, your cookie boundaries were being invaded. He looks at the clock. He says, I want to be mad for 2 minutes. She says, okay, go for it. So he starts screaming and jumping up and down and yelling and carrying on. Finally, he takes a deep breath, and he goes, how much time was that? And she said, 20 seconds. Keep going. He starts again. 10 seconds later, he goes, I'm done. I'm just done. Teacher says, what could you do next time to avoid the problem? I could put the cookies in my lunchbox right away. And she said, yeah, good for you. And that's how it goes. And if you can teach a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old this, your brains can get it. Memorize. When you feel fear, identify whether it's real or imagined, take appropriate action, and then be grateful, because that will help you upshift. Franklin D. Roosevelt, and no, I didn't know him personally either, said, there is nothing to fear but fear itself, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. So hone your skills related to managing fear. Remember, if you think you can or you think you can't, either way, you're right. And knowing that is powerful. Most of us don't use our brains anywhere near the level that's possible. And I encourage you to do that. Thank you.
We would like to thank the constituency of the Central California Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church for making this program possible, and from viewers just like you. Thank you.